I guess all the money just kind of disappeared for students in Washington State. Not entirely sure we know where it went, but according to Chris Reykdal, they don't have any money.
Our districts are distressed. We have less buying power by $1 billion than we had 5 years ago. Our message to the legislature is invest in schools. Don't hammer the social safety net. Some of the same kids who need those reading supports and math supports need housing. They need food. They need mental health support.
Now, he's saying that funding is down to $1,000 per student and says the biggest gap is in special education. So he's urging an extra $500 million per year investment for schools, including, of course, special ed. Now, that I have no problem with. Let's help those kids. I don't want to help anyone else, I'll be honest, because I don't believe that they have a problem with money. Now, I certainly concede that the inflation that we were told by the left wasn't happening did, in fact, happen, and that does impact their budgets. But the reality is the reason why they have less money, fewer dollars in their budget than they did in the past is because kids left public schools because of how poorly they were performing. So why would we give you even more money? You have fewer kids, right? What do you need more money for fewer kids? That doesn't really make sense to me. And again, I certainly concede that because of inflation, dollars don't go as far as they used to. That is true. But I don't know of a public school that actually, let me change that. There are certainly going to be public schools that, despite all of the nonsense that's occurred over the course of the last several years, courtesy of Democrats, have tried their best to protect kids and actually give them an honest education and actually focus on education. But I'm not going to pretend that overall, across the state, school districts have done even remotely enough to justify giving them any more money. Because they haven't. And at the exact same time, because of Governor Jay Inslee, you have a deal going into place that we simply can't afford that would give teachers more money, even more money. This was a gift to the teachers' unions, what it is he did. Just stop. But I will say, at least Chris Reykdal is being honest about potential cuts from the Department of Education or the total cut of the Department of Education and saying it's probably not going to have too big of an impact on Washington.
If there's a good news story here, it's that we're not as dependent on federal sources as other states. We're about 7% of our budgets here in the state on average.
Yeah, that's the case most of the place, like almost everywhere. The states are not that reliant on the federal government and federal funding, public schools. They are funded by you. And now that 7% that's coming from the government, from the Department of Education, what's the source of the 7%? What's the source of that money?
Taxpayers.
Exactly. What's the source of 100% of the money that goes from the federal government to the states for public education?
Taxpayers.
Exactly. What happens when you cut the Department of Education? What happens to those dollars? Where do they go?
It saves the taxpayer money.
It stays in the state.
Right, yeah.
Right? They may end up still having to pay something. I imagine that states will try to make up for it in higher taxes, property, whatever it is. But it stays in the state. So it doesn't actually go anywhere. The money doesn't just go to something else. We're not putting it into, the restoration of racist highways that Pete Buttigieg took down. That's not where it doesn't keep going into the federal government and you're out money. The money stays in your state. So you're not actually losing anything. You are losing literally nothing if you were to cut the Department of Education. Now, I don't support cutting completely the Department of Education. I certainly believe that we should be making some cuts, and I obviously believe that there's a lot that needs to be done there. But I don't support completely cutting it because the federal government, when you have a president in the White House who knows what it is he or she is doing, will stop abuse from schools and school districts like what happens in Washington State. And we'll talk a little bit about that more later on, but at least I will say, at least Chris Reykdal, who likes to stretch the truth a lot, was at least being honest there. And State Representative Jim Walsh, a Republican from Aberdeen, said that could actually help us if we cut the DOE.
We would like to see the federal money coming through with fewer strings attached. Sometimes you'll hear the term block grant used. From my perspective as a taxpayer, and I think most agree, that's something we want to see. We want to see more efficiency.
I think he's right.
No, I love inefficiency.
No, that's why I'm so upset with Elon Musk. I want the Department of Government inefficiency. I want to go back to what we had under the Biden administration.
It'd be called Doji.
Doji. Or dodgy.
Yeah.
It's kind of dodgy, although that has an extra D in it. But you know what I mean. That's where I think everyone's just kind of misreading the room. And again, the polling is pretty consistent, and it could change based on media narratives and whatnot, but we do like efficiency. We don't want to spend a whole bunch of money throwing it into the garbage bin because we have now 10 extra fires or forest service agents who are doing tours on trails with 2 people showing up. Like, I don't want that person to lose a job per se, but I don't want to pay for that person to have a job. And they can get a job in the private sector. Government jobs should not be what's holding up like an economy, right? Like when you're looking at the unemployment numbers, it shouldn't be high or low on the basis of the government. It should not have that kind of impact in either direction. The private sector should. Small businesses should. And so some people are going to be out of a job at the Department of Education at some point. Although, to be fair, there's going to be a judge who says, no, you can't fire anybody. Because apparently the executive can't fire anyone. You can hire, but you can never fire. That makes total sense. You can give money to a program, but you can never, ever, ever cut it. Ever.
I saw a Babylon Bee headline today. It was like federal judge declares himself president or something.
That'll happen next. That's the kind of, I love it. Donald Trump is a dictator. Let's allow this judge to make a decision from some jurisdiction in New Mexico for the entire country. Oh, okay. That makes sense.